Hey everyone, sorry for having to cancel arranging class for this week. So I'm just going to go through the main points that I was going to cover. Um, and we're talking specifically about the uh, saxophones this week. And for starters, I want to talk about the transposition for the saxophone family. Um, so it's all in the handout from last week. But just to kind of clarify a few things, because things get, like the trumpet is one thing where you just have to go up a whole step, or things get a lot more complicated with the saxophone family. So this is something that I want to be super clear about. Um, I'm going to briefly just mention the soprano saxophone, which is, as I said last week, it's often a double for tenor or alto saxophone players. So if we're writing for it, it's usually within an alto part or a tenor part, and that player will pick up the soprano for certain passages of music or for individual songs and so on. Um, but just to sort of briefly touch on the soprano saxophone is a B flat instrument, and it has the same transposition exactly as the trumpet. Um, the clarinet is also in this category, by the way, in case you find yourself ever writing for clarinet. Both the clarinet and the soprano saxophone have the same transposition as the trumpet, meaning it's up a half step, or sorry, up a whole step. And so I'm going to first talk about the tenor saxophone because the tenor saxophone is also a B flat transposing instrument, but it also has an octave transposition. So technically the transposition for tenor saxophone, and this is where things get confusing a little bit potentially, is that the transposition for the tenor saxophone is really up a ninth, a major ninth. Um, but an easier way of thinking about that is think of it as up a whole step as you would do for trumpet and then up an octave from there. So just to sort of show you, because I can feel everybody's brains already turning to mush as I'm saying this. Let me just bring up a MuseScore sheet here. So basically, let's say that you have uh, this note, D above middle C, and you want to transpose that for tenor saxophone. Now, if you were transposing it for trumpet, you would put it up a whole step, as we know. So we would make it an E. Sorry, that's not an E. There we go. Now, if we want it to sound in that register for tenor saxophone, this is the thing. If we write that note for tenor saxophone, it's going to sound an octave lower than the trumpet. If we want it to sound in the same register, um, so we want it to basically sound exactly like this D, then we have to put it an octave higher than that. So we have to put it there. So that's what that note would be for tenor saxophone. Okay. So hopefully that's not too confusing. I know it's a little bit confusing. Um, but basically, if you want to write a unison passage for trumpet and tenor saxophone, you have to write, both of them are going to transpose up a whole step, because they're both B flat transposing instruments. And they would share the same key signature. So if you're doing, remember I said, always transpose the key signature first. So uh, if you're um, transposing the key signature, both the trumpet and the tenor saxophone are going to have the same key signature. but they're going to be in different octaves if you want to have them in unison. You have to write the tenor saxophone an octave higher than the trumpet, and then they'll sound the same. They won't sound the same, but they'll be in the same octave. Okay, so I hope that that's relatively clear. So again, it's a transposition of a major ninth, but it's the easier way of thinking of it is think of it as up a whole step and then up an octave from there. Now, the alto saxophone. The alto saxophone is a bit of a tricky bit of business. The alto saxophone is an E-flat transposing instrument. And what that means is if you write a C for the alto saxophone, if you write a C, it's going to sound like an E-flat. Right, so that's what it means to be an E-flat instrument. It just means that concert E-flat, you would write it as a C. Okay? So here's the trick, though. Down a so E flat to C is a minor third. So in essence, if you have an E flat instrument, you're going to go down a minor third. But in terms of the register of the alto saxophone, where it actually sits, it's really the mirror image interval of the minor third, which is a major sixth. So the whatever the written note is for the alto saxophone, sorry, whatever the concert note is. So let's say, let me go back to this D here. We decided that this D natural is going to be an E natural for tenor sax, but it has to be up here in this octave. Let's say we want to write this same D for alto sax. So it's going to go up a major six, but a six is a big interval to kind of try to identify quickly. So what I find much easier, and this is my way of thinking of it, is go down a minor third and then up an octave. Okay, so down a minor third and up an octave. So down a minor third from this D would be this B. Right? But in order to have the saxophone play it, the alto sax, which remember is pitched higher than the tenor sax, right? So it's in between the soprano and the tenor. In order to have that B sound like this D, then you have to write it, you have to put it an octave higher than that. So we need to put it up there. Okay, so it's a major sixth higher. But again, I find it much easier to think of it as down a minor third and then up an octave. It's a two-step process that's actually faster than the one-step process of trying to think of what a major six is. So anyway, I find it easier. You may or may not. If you want to think of it as a major six, that's fine too. So again, it's important to transpose the key signature first when you're writing your part out. So remember that whatever the concert key is, the key for an E-flat instrument like the alto saxophone is going to be a minor third down. So for example, C concert would become A transpose for the E-flat instrument. Okay, so if we're in C concert, For B flat instruments like the trumpet, the tenor saxophone, the soprano saxophone, we're going to be in D, right? Two sharps, so up a tone. For E flat instruments, we're going to be down a minor third, so it's going to be the key of A. So another couple of examples. E flat is an easy one to think of for E flat instruments because down a minor third from E flat, of course, is C, which means that if we're in E flat concert, we're going to be in C transpose for the alto sax. Okay, so now we need to talk briefly about the baritone sax. So the um, the problem inherent with the baritone sax is that all the notes, or let's say most of the notes, most of the range of the baritone saxophone is in the bass clef. So if you're writing a concert part for baritone sax, it's going to be in bass clef. But when you transpose it for the player to play, you're going to write it in treble clef. And this goes back to this concept of why, um, why all saxophone parts are written basically the same. It's this idea that you want to have, if you're switching from one type of saxophone to another, as many saxophone players do, you want to have the same fingering regardless of which horn you're picking up. Um, so C is going to be a C on an alto saxophone. It's going to be fingered the same as a C on a tenor saxophone or on a baritone saxophone. All the parts are going to look the same, but they are going to sound different. Um, so it's really about convenience for the player and avoiding copious amounts of ledger lines and things like that. So, um, so the baritone sax is really, like I say, let me just switch to a bass clef here for a second, just temporarily. Now, let's say that I have um, let me do a D again. So here's a D in the middle of the bass clef staff. So now, if I want to write that for baritone saxophone, again, there's this minor third down transposition. But here's the rub. With baritone saxophone, you're going to go down a minor third and then up 2 octaves. So it's going to be written an octave higher than the um, alto sax would be in order to sound the same. So I know this is going to be like potentially super confusing, but bear with me. Um, and it's going to be written in the treble clef. I know it's madness. So, oops. Okay, so let me go back to treble clef here. Okay, so I've got this um, D in the bass clef. And so if I want to write it for baritone sax, first of all, it's going to go down a minor third, which is this B, the line below the D. Um, however, then it's got to go up 2 octaves. So the first octave is would be here, the space below the treble staff, and then the another octave up would be this D, right? Sorry, B. Yeah, let me just clarify that again. So we would have to write this D as a B. So we want to go, this is like one octave above that B, and then the next octave above that B is that one in the middle of the treble clef staff. Now, here's the, I know, I realize that this concept is, um, this is potentially where things could get a little bit hairy, but here's the thing that I want you to notice. Um, Notice that the position of the D in the bass clef staff is the same as the position of the B in the treble clef staff, right? So the shortcut for writing baritone saxophone music is that you can take the, because you're going to write your initial sketch in concert pitch in bass clef, because that's where the notes in the baritone sax reside primarily. And you're going to take that, and if you write it in the same space or line, but just change the clef, right? So you're just going to change bass clef to treble clef. And if you do that, then you'll have the note in the right place. Now the caveat here, and this is important, so focus on this information, you have to make sure the key signature is properly transposed. Once you've done that, so that's one thing. Once you've done that, then again, the usual wisdom in terms of if there's no accidentals in the concert part, there will be no accidentals in the transposed part. And if there are accidentals, then there will be accidentals, but you have to keep in mind those false friends, right? Just and there are going to be some different ones with the E flat transposition. For example, um, if you have an E flat and you transpose that for alto sax, it's not going to be a C flat, it's going to be a C natural, right? A D flat will become a B flat, but an E flat will become a C natural. So you just have to watch out for those little snags. But aside from that, if you've properly transposed the key signature, so let's say we're in the key of C, so I would make my baritone sax part, I would make that the key of A. Which doesn't affect this note, but anyway, but this is the key signature that should happen. If C is my concert key signature, then I have to put A for the baritone sax, and then I can, once I have that key signature transposed, then I can just write everything more, on the same lines and spaces as they would be in the bass clef, just with the using the treble clef instead. Okay, so it's a shortcut and it makes things a little easier, but you just have to be careful and make sure, look out for the false friends, etc. Just double check any notes that have accidentals and things like that. Okay, so those are the basic principles of transposition for the saxophone family. Now, I also want to just briefly look at these concepts of the range charts that are in this chapter 1. There are basically what they've done is they've gone through each of the registers of each of the instruments, and they talk about what the capabilities are of the instrument in each of those registers. Now, this is really more information than you need, so you don't need to get too hung up on this stuff. But I am going to go through it. So we're going to go back to the trumpet for a minute and just because this is where we sort of start. So let me just get to the right page here. Sorry for the noise. Okay, so if you look at page 4 here, you can see that you have this range of the horn. This is the trumpet, and you have the concert range and then the transposed range. Now, in practical terms, the extreme ranges of the instrument you're not going to be writing for, right? So you can basically forget about 1, 5, 6, and 7. You know, anything that you write for the trumpet is going to mostly be in 2 and 3, and possibly up to 4 if you're writing lead trumpet parts. You know, that high B flat or, you know, the transposed C. That's the highest note that you would probably be writing. So you really only have to worry about the 2, 3, and 4 registers for the purposes of this class. If you want to look at, you know, the information about the other registers, that's fine for your own information. But for the sake of just honing in on the material that's actually going to be practical. So what it tells us here is that the 2 register, which is from the concert C up to the C sharp above, which transposed would be D to D sharp. This is the most used low register of the trumpet's range. You get a clear, rich tone through the bottom 3 semitones, though the bottom 3 semitones may convey the characteristics of 1, so meaning that it's going to be harder to play in tune, potentially, especially if you're playing at a louder dynamic level. Projection is good. Blendability is excellent. Blendability meaning how does the sound of the instrument combine with the other instruments it's playing with, other horns. Reasonable leaps in and out of this area are easily executed, and endurance is not a problem, meaning you don't have to worry too much about wearing the player out. Dynamic range in that register, in that 2 register, is super versatile. You can go all the way from a double piano up to a double forte quite comfortably. The 3 register, which goes from the sort of D on the second from the top line, the high D on the staff, up to the F above that. It's like a bridge between the 2 and the 4 register. It says it should be considered an extension of either area. Here, the trumpet can be at its brightest or stay covered if it needs to be. In other words, you have that control and that capability to either project strongly or you can still blend quite easily. Endurance, not a big problem. Dynamic range, similar to the 2. A little harder to play a double piano in that register. So then the 4 range, which goes from that top F sharp up to the B flat above that. I'm talking concert pitch now. This is the high end of the range for most small group writing, particularly when other instruments are voiced harmonically under the trumpet lead. The sound is clear and bright. Projection is excellent. From this area upward, it's virtually impossible for the trumpet to be hidden within a voicing. For that reason, it should only be used for strong lead work when you really, in other words, when you really want the trumpet to stick out, as opposed to blending in a more homogeneous way with the other instruments. It should only be used for strong lead work or to play harmony under another trumpet. Endurance depends a great deal on the individual player's ability, especially regarding embouchure and control of airstream. Um, Avoid using it when the capability of the trumpet player is of less than professional caliber. Even in appropriate situations, don't write in this area for more than approximately 16 bars at a time. Um, Surround any prolonged use of this register with at least a few bars rest before and after the passage. So this comes down to just, you know, the just the physical limitations of the instrument in terms of how it affects your what they call the embouchure, which is the relationship of your face and your mouth and lips to how you produce the sound on the instrument. Reasonable leaps in and out of this area are practical. Dynamic range, you can't go much lower than a mezzo forte in that higher register, but you can go all up to a double forte pretty easily if you've got a good player. So it's a louder register. So I will skip 5, 6, and 7 because you don't really have to worry about those. Mutes we talked about, so there's a section on mutes. So for the trombone, you can read about the different registers of the trombone. They're going to be basically very similar. If you read through page 7 and 8 there, again, you can pretty much ignore the 1 register. You can ignore 6 and 7. Now with the trombone, they do use the 5 register a little bit more. That's the top of the written range for most small group situations. The sound is bright and clear, but blendability can be a problem when the trombone is playing harmony in a passage with the dynamic marking softer than mezzo forte. So that top register is going to be that would be the absolute kind of highest register for our purposes of the trombone, would be that 5 register. You would probably use it mostly for unison work at a higher volume level, a mezzo forte up to a forte or double forte. All right, so you can read through that if you want more clarity around that. Then we get into the saxophones, and so again, if you now that you sort of know what we're talking about here, you can kind of read through this section on your own. I think rather than me just kind of reading it to you. Hopefully you get the idea now of what the topic is. Basically what it's telling you is, and by the way, on Moodle, I created a version of these range charts that's color coded, and so it's a lot easier um, to sort of understand and see visually what's going on. So for those of you who are more on the visual side of the learning spectrum, you might find that helpful to look at, because I find even me looking at these range charts, it's a bit overwhelming at times. So um, when we but I mean that's when you're doing your arranging your final project and all that, and you'll have that to refer to. So now I'm going to just flip ahead to the homework here. I'm going to there's a series of pages of part of this handout. The first page is range analysis. Now I'm going to save that because I want to go over that stuff in class with you a little bit more and just be super clear about it. Now that I've kind of opened the topic, I want to kind of I do want to have a chance to talk to you about it. um, and we'll maybe do some of this work in class, but um, it's really just about um, analyzing these passages and figuring out if it's practical for the instrument to play in this register at the dynamic levels given, etc. Okay, so we'll leave that page for the time being. So the one that I'm going to skip ahead to is the one that I said you could start with the trumpet. Um, so this is page 19, uh, and it's B. Okay, so it's this page. Now, it says, write the following solo melody for each indicated instrument. Try to keep it in the given octave, but change octave if necessary for better playability. And I'll say more about that in a moment. Your writing may be in concert or appropriately transposed for the instrument. Okay, no. I'm changing that. You have to transpose it. That's the whole point, is we're practicing transposition, right? Um, so what I want you to do is basically uh, write this melody. You're going to rewrite it on each of these lines for the appropriate instrument, meaning you have to uh, transpose it appropriately. And the first thing that you want to do is transpose the key signature, right? We've said that a bunch of times now, but I'm going to reiterate that point. So this is the concert key signature, E flat, right? 3 flats. And so remember that the trumpet and the tenor sax are going to have the same key signature, a major second up. I'm not going to say what it is. You can figure that out. I just basically told you. And the alto sax and the baritone sax are going to also have the same key signature because they're both E flat instruments. So that means you have to put the key signature down a minor third, and it's going to be the same for both of them. The trombone is written in concert pitch, so it's just gonna, all you have to do there is change the clef, make it a bass clef. So it'll be the same key signature as the concert phrase. Okay, now let me talk about the octave thing. It says, um, write it in the given octave where possible, but for the lower instruments, primarily the trombone and the baritone sax, you're not going to end up writing it in that same octave. It's going to be at least an octave lower than that. So that's okay. Uh, in other words, like if uh, wrote this for baritone sax, um, you wouldn't do the necessarily like down a minor third and up 2 octaves. It would be really just 1 octave, and then it's going to sound an octave lower than the trumpet and the alto. Okay, so I hope that's relatively clear. You if you have questions about it, just start working on it. And if you need to refer back to, um, there's a transposition chart also on Moodle. Those resources are there, so refer to them if you need to. There's like a transposition cheat sheet on there that you can use as a guide for working through this. So I think if you use that and read back over this if you need to, um, then you should be okay to do this. Um, I'm going to say this again: transpose the key signatures first. So so that's all. So just do this page. That's the only homework for this week. And um, if you find yourself stuck on anything, you can hand it in at the end of class next week, because I'll go over it and we'll try to answer any questions that you might have. And that's about it. So I'm going to leave off there and have a good week, rest of your week, and we'll see you next week.